Hello, my name is Isaac and welcome to the Green Left Show. Now, it's been just over a month since US President Donald Trump was elected for his second term, and he's introduced a whirlwind of changes. To get a handle on what all of these changes mean and the implications for working people around the world, we spoke to two US socialists, Huang and Michaela Brangan. They're both the members of the Democratic Socialists of America and a part of the Bread and Roses caucus within the DSA. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that this video was recorded on Gadigal land that was stolen and never ceded, and always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Green Left pledges to stand with First Nations people in campaigns for justice, sovereignty, and land rights. If you like the work we do, please become a Green Left supporter. It's the best way to both support our work and to receive the content that we produce. Plans start from just $5 a month. You can find out more and sign up at greenleft.org.au/support or click the link in the description. Now, we started by asking Sin to guide us through what Trump has done in the first month of his presidency.
Since taking office last month, ironically on MLK Jr. Day, Trump has signed a torrent of executive orders touching on virtually every aspect of, American economy, society, and politics, and with devastating consequences for millions of Americans and also people around the world. There's simply too many things to name, but I'll try to list a few. Very notably on the foreign policy front, he said the United States should seize control of Gaza, permanently displace the Palestinians, make a seaside enclave. He made this proposal as, they were trying to secure a ceasefire deal. What else? He's appointed a really hawkish Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who made a presidential run a couple of years ago. He said he wanted to take possession of Greenland and the Panama Canal, extending, the Americans' sphere of influence in Latin America against the Chinese. He renamed the Gulf in one of his sillier moves to the Gulf of America. He's ordered the suspension of all American foreign aid programs for 90 days, with a few exceptions. Tariffs, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. Domestically, the situation hasn't been better either. He's pardon the January 6th rioters. He wants to deny citizenship to people born in the United States whose parents might not be American citizens. He wants to apply this very selectively to go after specific racial and ethnic minorities. ICE has been in the news, of course. He's declared an emergency at the southern border, canceled asylum appointments, has been deporting thousands of people. Just so many other things, whether it be DEI, LGBTQ rights, just clawing back historic gains made by social labor movements and trying to beat people into submission. And if it's any indication of what's to come, it's going to be a battle. And I think just to put a bow on it, maybe a few weeks ago, Trump's newfound ally, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, I think really captured the intentions of his, tech business class plus the new administration really well when he said in an interview that the whole society, the structure of society effectively will be up for debate and reconfiguration, and of course not for the better.
I also asked Michaela how she would assess Trump 2.0.
It's really been a assault on democracy in the broad sense that it's a real challenge to what has been a kind of at least normative view of executive power being limited by Congress and the courts. And the challenges that are happening right now is kind of like a no holds barred, just bulldozer, really, of using the administrative state against itself. And what I'll say to that, you've probably heard of DOGE at this point, the Department of Government Efficiency, that is headed up by the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who has been given what appears to be carte blanche to run an unfettered purge of the federal civil service. So just to give a little bit of background, what that entails is actually the dismantlement of the New Deal administrative state, the New Deal being the kind of almost like the other side of like the coin of what's happening right now, which was a strong presidential mandate to remedy longstanding problems in capital crises culminating in the Great Depression that then allowed FDR to have, in some ways, carte blanche to both regulate capital in ways that they had attempted but failed to do piecemeal before because of a hostile court, as well as really, really aggressive, sort of capital challenges, as well as, this kind of deal with labor to stop, striking and stop threatening to become communists, and allowing, for example, the very first federal labor law to come into action, right? So I'm just going to say, from my perspective, what it looks like is Elon Musk, and he is, of course, just the avatar for a whole host of desires of the ruling class, is trying to undo the administrative state, in particular, the regulation of capital. And whether or not they crash the economy is of no consequence, because I think what they would like to see is almost like, well, our problems stem from the fact that a previous capital crisis was remedied through the introduction of an administrative state and a regulatory apparatus. What if instead of that, we answer it with labor discipline and complete social control? And I think that because the labor movement, while there has been a lot of activity and it's been very promising, obviously, like a lot of unions, the Starbucks union movement, it's still at its weakest point. Private industry is at 6% unionization, and public sector unions are also under assault. So I see what's happening with Doge and with this whole thing as kind of almost like the wish fulfillment of a longstanding conservative desire to see the end of the New Deal and put capital really in the driver's seat in a powerful way, which I think that we can say, even if we don't want to use the F word, has fascistic implications. I mean, to actually do it that overtly, as well as like a whole host of other things that are happening. For example, Jeff Bezos today wrote to his to the Washington Post like editorial board and said, we're not going to, have opinion anymore. What we're going to have is propaganda. So it's happening in lots of different places, but I think Doge is kind of the biggest thing. And then there's been, ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, basically like border police, have been notably going into communities and deporting people or grabbing people for deportation, which the debate around that really has to do with, well, is he going to actually do more than what Trump did in his first term or what Biden did or what Obama did? And while I think at this point it's hard to say, we don't know how many people are being deported, numbers are coming in from everywhere. Trump is determined to claim the mantle of deporter in chief and is willing to use emergency and wartime powers to be able to empower ICE even more.
And what has the response been from social movements and the left?
As you would expect, I think the response to the second Trump administration is really fragmented, especially in light of the fact that this country lacks something like an independent workers' party that would coordinate struggles and build a national movement against Trump. So, in light of that kind of absence, I think it's still really important to resist generalizations like, oh, there's no, resistance to Trump simply because we're not seeing, these large scale nationwide mobilizations like that last time. This might be a little tangential, but I think it's important to discuss. Last time Trump took office, there were about, I think, like 5 million people who descended upon his inauguration, whereas this time there were only around like 5,000 in the Capitol. And, there's a question, what should we make of that? I think we certainly shouldn't take it to mean that, there's widespread support or, lack of critical opinion towards the administration. Rather, I think it signals a really profound kind of exhaustion and disillusionment on the part of the American public. These sentiments are supported in large part by the hollow, half-assed, resistance Democrats put up last time, but also the failure of the left, I think, to provide concrete political alternatives, especially in the form of democratic bottom-up movement organizations that not only mobilize in the street, but educate and train people in between upsurges. There's, not a lot of that in the social fabric. And, Yeah, this is purely anecdotal, but a lot of people, just to give you a sense of the mood, a lot of people in my life have voiced something to the effect of, well, last time I went to a bunch of protests, it didn't really produce the outcome we wanted. So what else is there left to do? Uh, yeah, and in response to that, like the problem certainly won't go away if we don't mobilize and demonstrate that there can be a social majority that stands against Trump. But people do have a very strong intuitive understanding of the balance of power in society right now, and many of them have just chosen, to keep their heads down and to get through it. Not to mention, this younger generation that's growing up, their whole lives have been bookended by Trump. Their lives were started with the financial crisis, then boom, they come of like conscious political age. Trump is in office, cycles through Biden, back to Trump, and so they think this is the norm. But yeah, moving away from like this big picture federal side of things, I think the general shape of resistance right now is that struggle is being waged by those who need it most, those who are on the chopping block first, whether it be immigrants, federal workers, especially. And so, yeah, just to list a couple of things we're seeing on the immigration front, communities and teachers unions, especially, have been building intelligence infrastructure to understand the movements of ICE. They've been training their members on how to defer ICE when they get to campus. In my context in Oakland, and I think in various other cities around the country, there was like a day without immigrants kind of action, which encouraged immigrants to refrain from going to work, from going to businesses, school, to highlight their essential role in the economy and in our communities.
Because everything is happening so quickly and at such a wide scale, it's actually really difficult to mobilize in defense of immigrants who are undocumented because you don't know who's being taken away at any particular point. And they're apparently shipping people to Guantanamo if they can't be deported right back to their country. So that part is difficult to do in any way besides showing up and rallying for support of immigrants in a general way. Trump is also threatening to, and some people say preparing to invoke emergency and wartime powers, which were within the purview of the executive, to try to do these deportations without having Congress in any way involved. So this is not me saying that I don't think people should come out and do that. And people have been, Make the Road, which is like a big, primarily focusing on immigrants, as well as DSA and DSA's international committees and local DSA chapters have been organizing rallies. There's going to be one this weekend, actually, like in Jersey City, where I live, close to where I live. So it is kind of difficult to know how to go about doing this, except for a lot of know your rights stuff. Like, for example, ICE does not have the authority to come into somebody's home and take people away. They don't have the right to come into businesses and take people away without a search warrant. They're still under the, barely functional, but still legally valid Fourth Amendment, which is, within the Bill of Rights in the US Constitution. So trying to let people know and trying to create kind of a critical mass of people who are refusing to cooperate by, for example, opening the door or turning over their neighbor or letting kids be taken out of school. Those are some of the things I think are happening around immigration, but they're not happening in mass yet.
On another front, various democracy watch groups, like watchdog groups, sorry, unions, some states even have been filing a lawsuit after lawsuit against the Trump administration over things like, his attempt to deny birthright to citizenship, over the other day, Trump banned the AP, which has a very slightly critical opinion of him, from going to press conferences, things like that. Of course, the purges of federal employees, probationary employees, filing legal charges over this stuff. But these attempts, it's important to understand, are very, very precarious given both, the Trump's hold on the federal judiciary and the overall, balance of forces. We know that, the legal interpretations and moral etiquette is going to reflect that balance. And, that's why Trump's been able to steamroll, even though a lot of these suits are coming his way. What else? On the federal worker front of things, there's a great new burgeoning unionist group called the Federal Unionist Network. It's got a really cool acronym, fun. They organized a day of action on February 19th to tell Musk to get his hands off the federal government and to build awareness, of course, of the essential services, federal workers provide that so many of us depend on. And unions around the country, from education, healthcare unions, have been in the streets protesting in this day of action as well. My union, UAW 4811, which represents 48,000 academic student employees who have been hit so hard by the cuts to National Institute of Health funding, are participating. We're, I think, just like throwing a bunch of tactics at the wall and seeing what sticks, from rallies, mobilizations, to lobbying, lawsuits, and also building contract fights that can enshrine stronger protections. But oh yeah, two other things I want to mention. Probably seen headlines about Bernie Sanders touring the country on the so-called Fight the Oligarchy tour. He's been more on brand with messaging as of late, pointing his fingers at the right people, but it's very unclear what kind of organizational vehicle that's tied to. And so we don't just need to point fingers, we need to take action and actually build ourselves for the long haul. So I think that's the missing piece, but it's really great. He's one of the few people doing this, especially on a national kind of scale. As we were discussing earlier, lots of people are flooding into DSA. There's just so much desperation and people want to figure out how to do something, but we got to translate that into a real organizing plan and program. But that being said, I just listed a bunch of really important initiatives, but the battle is going to be bigger than any single fight against an individual employer. I think in this coming period, it's going to be really vital to find opportunities to get movements, to get unions to unite their struggles, to stand together, and to break out of the narrow, defensive, like kind of sectoral approach that is obviously very natural and characteristic of initial stages of struggle. But yeah, we have to build that kind of unity if we're gonna defeat something as big and broad as Trump's administration.
There's going to have to be, again, like a lot more rank and file and sort of community action in order to demonstrate displeasure with this kind of censorship and authoritarianism.
One of the most notable moments from Trump's inauguration was the presence of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg, some of the richest people in the world. I asked Sin and Michaela what the close ties between the Trump administration and these billionaires means for working people.
Very, very visible ruling class solidarity is on display, and a concerted effort to really put capitalists right there, right there in the driver's seat, ruling alongside really politicians, or even ruling in place of them. I mean, I'm not seeing very many people who are, elected leaders saying anything, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. Maybe I'm just not, I don't know, looking at the right news. When I do see the news, I cringe because I'm just like, everything is awful, actually see people on the mainstream channels. But I do see a lot of an emboldened ruling class that is being led by powerful moguls, really. And that's very unique because these aren't widely popular figures. I mean, Elon Musk has a kind of, I think, valence of popularity because he owns Twitter and because he has an army of may or may not be robot sycophants, retweeting his everything. But I don't actually think it matters to them very much whether or not they're popular. What matters to them is whether they actually have direct hold on power, and Trump has allowed it. Trump is giving it to them.
Every day brings with it a new kind of mask off moment, and that is saying so much given how high the bar was set at this at his inauguration. Sorry, in other times, capitalists have tried to maintain a veneer of separation between business interests and the state, but those days are gone. Never before have we seen the state and capital, or sections of capital, been so nakedly aligned. And I think part of the reason why, as we've mentioned before in this interview, is that the ruling class feels confident that they can get away with it. Around the world, they've seen right-wing movements go on the offensive, take advantage of the discontent created by traditional neoliberal governance. The leaders of these movements, from Trump to Malay, far-right figures in Germany, have made every indication that they want to restore business confidence by giving tax breaks to the rich and making lives worse for working people. And what better way to illustrate that confidence and allegiance than having the three wealthiest dudes in America, and basically almost the three wealthiest men in the world line up behind you at your inauguration. Um, I think it's notable too that like all of them are tech giants, signaling what kind of dimensions 21st century exploitation has, hyper surveillance, rapid vertical and horizontal integration of the market, the just unfettered development and deployment of AI, which of course, technology is not inherently good or bad, but in the hands of these, rich, evil people, it's going to be bad. And yeah, the implications for working people are just horrible. Like, before Trump was inaugurated, it was already horrible. This oligarchy has already been waging war on their workers, shit working conditions, hours, impossible production quotas, horrible defunded public transportation, everything. Every kind of thing that matters in life has been systematically degraded by these people. But now that they're at the helm of the government, they get to wage war from above. Elon Musk, for example, has ransacked the federal government, agencies that are investigating his company for all sorts of kinds of malpractice. And the other day they just appointed a anti-union, anti-worker labor secretary that applauded I think right to work initiatives. Yeah, so it's very clear the agenda is to clear the way for profits by beating workers into submission, and that's what they're going to continue to do until we stand up.
It's not like the Democrats have been that much better, you know?
Yeah.
It's just that their business people are also like woke or something, you know? It's like now we just have the non-woke moguls in charge and who are like much more overt. And I think for some people it's just, there's an idea, it's like, yeah, this might be painful, but for some people it's like as painful as, for example, COVID or like the financial crisis that happened in 2008.
Mm.
So people
Yeah.
have, I think a reasonable view. I don't think they're correct, but a reasonable view that this couldn't be necessarily any worse and it might be better to see what happens. I think that once people's tax returns don't come back to them or, these kinds of things, people will have reason to complain. And of course, like I said, people are already starting to complain. But the kind of, I think, general drift is the Democrats also haven't really done very much. And of course, Democrats respond to that as, well, you're going to get what you voted for, which is, of course, just the absolute worst possible thing you could say.
Why is Trump implementing or threatening to implement trade tariffs on Mexico, Canada, Australia, the EU, and other countries?
This is a little bit hard to answer, and I'm no expert on international political economy, but for anybody, regardless of your expertise, I think this is hard to answer because it involves a lot of speculation when we start talking about the potential motives behind these tariffs, because a lot of factors are at play. So, I mean, I was just trying to listen to various podcasts and read things, and so one calculation is that, um, you know, uh, Trump made certain campaign promises. He ran on the immigration and drug trafficking crisis. Even if the facts about crime and drug trafficking contradict his narrative, instituting these tariffs will both please, I think, large swaths of his base and perhaps grant him some foreign policy leverage, especially to get these other countries, to go harder at the border. Um, Economically, the picture is a bit more complicated, as you said. The economies he's targeted are no like small remote islands anywhere. He's targeted them with very significant tariffs and big economies that are so thoroughly integrated with the American economy that these moves inevitably have to be met with pushback from various sections of capital, which is why I think you're seeing something like the I think it was like a 1 month pause on the tariffs on Mexico and Canada at least. And that leads to the further speculation that really the goal for all of this is to go after China. But the scale and efficiency of their economy is so significant that they could potentially handle it, and also they have significant abilities to inflict pain on us as well. So I think this has led some people, especially like I'm very influenced by Vivek Chibber, a sociologist and political economist, who suggests that maybe the real aim is to balance the tax revenues lost through things like the tax breaks that Trump wants to push in the first budget, with the tax revenues gained through things like these tariffs. So I think I'm willing to meet him there. And yeah, what this means for working people is, of course, the greater costs of these imports are going to be passed off from the importers to us. And, so much for, the idea that Trump is going to go hard on inflation.
Many of you will have seen the AI-generated video that Trump put up on his social media pages depicting a nightmarish vision of the future of so-called Trump Gaza.
Tunnels coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright.
This comes after Trump's February 5 announcement, sitting alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that the US would take over Gaza, clear the Palestinians from the land, and send them to neighboring countries to turn Gaza into the so-called Riviera of the Middle East. While this received widespread outrage from human rights groups, solidarity activists, even some world leaders, and of course Palestinians who pledged to resist any such plans, Trump is sticking to his guns. In addition, Trump has dramatically shifted US policy on Ukraine, beginning peace talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and even calling Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator.
You will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influenced.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I was
You don't have the
it.
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
Right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think
You're
you-
gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III.
I asked Sin and Michaela how we can understand Trump's approach to both Gaza and Ukraine. What is driving these decisions, and does Trump's foreign policy represent a break from the previous Joe Biden administration, or simply an escalation? And what does it reflect about the role of the US in the world today?
Trump's foreign policy around the world, but especially when it comes to Gaza and the Middle East, make a complete sham out of a lot of things, including the idea that he was the anti-war guy. I think his ambitions for Gaza, again, represent not only a continuation of Biden's, carte blanche for Israel, but an escalation of it. And should he act on his plans to evict Palestinians and make a luxury settlement out of, Gaza, it will require more war, whether that be economically or militarily undergirded. I think it's also helpful to think about Gaza, Israel, the Middle East in the context of the global, economic competition that the U.S. is struggling to assert itself in. First of all, Israel is a great guarantor of U.S. interests in the region, and since the genocide and Israel's advancements against Hezbollah, Iran, and the like, the U.S.'s position in the Middle East has significantly strengthened. So that's one reason to continue giving, cover to Israel. Secondly, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine convinced capital, or at least parts of capital, that they have to exert more control over Middle Eastern oil, which will be essential, I think, as the U.S. gears up for industrial warfare against China. And here's another point of continuity, you could say, between Biden, Trump, and Obama, is that this dependence on that kind of oil has been addressed by all these administrations who have made the U.S. the leading oil producer in the world again. But again, the task is tall, facing up to Russia, BRICS, and especially China. So, I think I see a lot of continuities. I think the means that they pursue are slightly different, but the basic political frameworks remain the same.
I think he's abandoning the speak softly and carry a big stick approach of the Reagan, kind of neocon right. And instead, he's treating everything like it's a real estate transaction. Like, we need to stop the war in Gaza. But the way we're going to do it is also by getting rid of Palestinians and turning it into, capital investment. And I also think that's what he's doing in Ukraine, with it comes to, whatever comes to pass on Friday, whenever a big deal is signed or whatever, it has something to do with mineral rights, right? So the idea, and he's framing it as, we're going to get our money back. i.e., like all the taxpayer dollars that have been flowing to Ukraine are going to come back in the form of mineral rights, which will then allow us to do manufacturing here or whatever. But yeah, I think that his view, it's kind of an interesting question whether this is a continuation of Biden. I think that it's not a continuation because he's replaced everyone who was doing Bidenism with now people who are doing Trumpism. But it's a form of Zionism that is really just so much more openly capitalistic, I guess, in like the crudest way. It's almost like absurd. I mean, the video itself, which was, I guess supposed to allow a person to visualize what it could be like instead of a war-torn country, just shows, like, I think that was sincere. I think that it was really like, this is what's possible if you let me do the thing that I'm good at, which is making hotels. And it is amazing to me that like we are dealing with a president who really does have like that view. Because I don't really think it's much more sophisticated than that. He thinks peace is good for business and war is bad for business, which I think, sort of defense contractors be damned or whatever. But like, I think for him, peace is better for like the kind of business that he thinks is, sustainable and I guess makes a better world than whatever it is the United States has been doing, which is a combination of imperialism and sort of soft power everywhere. Or I guess those two things are the same. Getting rid of USAID, which has a lot of different functions. And one of them includes like basically promoting free markets. Those are all closed down now, like those areas are all closed down. And I think part of it is, well, we don't need that in order to exert power. What we need is a tight web of basically like capital investment and ownership, and private ownership, and being able to force other countries to both appreciate and allow the United States to do those things. That's my view. I think that it's kind of like I've only kind of gotten to that point today because of everything that's come out about Ukraine and Gaza, because it's very different than what has been the norm for the right. The right, even the most like sort of hawkish right, has had some kind of idea that like U.S. power comes from our ability to, build up military bases and things like that. I really think that Trump is, we'll have, military bases in some places, but mostly what we're going to do is just have, luxury resorts everywhere.
Trump said things to the effect of Ukraine started the war. He said that Zelensky is an unelected dictator or something like that, and that his administration is at best negligent or at worst, deliberately mishandling U.S. aid. And also to accompany the things he's said, he's made really exacting demands, most notably like 500 billion, I think, in like 500 billion dollars worth of mineral riches are going to be demanded from Ukraine in exchange for continued support in their defensive war against Russia. And I think a lot of people have made very astute comparisons to other, historical situations. If we recall the steep penalties imposed on like Germany after World War I, for example, which really underpinned hyper-nationalist revenge, schemes and ultimately the rise of Nazism. And so anyways, it's important to understand, I think, his comments and deeds in the context, again, of the U.S. ruling class's material interests. It's never been about national sovereignty for Ukraine, despite whatever Biden has said. History has shown that whenever the U.S. describes itself as merely doing what's principled and moral, in this case, aiding efforts, however fraught, to defend against imperialist aggression, it's always been not because it cares about democracy, but because, they believe that they can get something out of it. And I think Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, said it very well as early as like late 2023 or middle of 2023 when he said like, people ask me if the war in Ukraine is worth it. Well, guess what we've got out of it? Like, we haven't lost one soldier. We've reduced Russia's, combat power by however many percent. None of us have died. Tell me that isn't a great deal for the United States. So, they said it straight to our faces. Ukraine is a chess piece in a greater power struggle. The U.S. is looking to subordinate its biggest competitors, many of them in BRICS, but especially China. And if you don't understand that, then these sudden about faces, these 180s when it comes to U.S. foreign policy are going to make no sense at all. Washington, I think, has gained almost as much as possible from this war as it can. Russia has been severely weakened militarily. Its government has tanked in terms of public opinion. It's lost its hold on the market for military equipment, and also the EU has severely been weakened as a U.S. economic competitor because of Russia's backing out of the deal, the energy deal that they have with the EU. So, having gotten our share, it's like no surprise that the U.S. ruling class is more willing to pull the rug out from under Ukraine and just use this horrible situation as an opportunity to, rake in more profits. And I think, they're trying to do that now by using Ukraine's debt to institute more privatization by Western companies, in particular BlackRock.
The 2016 elections, when Trump was first elected, saw a surge of membership among left organizations in the US, including the DSA. This was also brought on by the immense popularity of the Bernie Sanders campaign in the Democratic primaries, which presented a progressive vision and hope for many. Is there a so-called Trump bump being repeated this time around? And what does resistance to Trump look like in 2025? How is the left organizing in this shifting political climate?
I think that the bumps that are taking place are actually, it's kind of a little bit steadier than it has been in the past. Like I was part of the original Bernie bump. So I guess, now I've seen a few more as an old head, relatively speaking, to the DSA, because, the new DSA kind of came about through Bernie, having supported his candidacy and having that just have been so popular and attracted so many people. And then during Biden, there was a downward shift, in part because there was a lot of back to brunchers, people who were more like, okay, well, Trump's gone, so not so desperate. Now I think that the people who are coming into DSA, at least this maybe is a little bit my glass half full take, but also just having been around, feel less like they're exploring it as one of many possibilities or one of many organizations, and more like an alternative to the Democrats. Because, the two-party system in the United States has made it such that, and definitely a lot of hardcore Democrats are still saying this, is like, what, do you want Trump to win? You have to vote for her. But the war in Gaza really, really, I think, turned a lot of people's heads as far as what are you, why are you doing this? This is so unpopular and also so genocidal that it made people who felt like at least the Democrats are trying to do something right as no, we're done. And then also the fact that they lost the popular vote. There's many theories about why that's the case, including, people say, well, there should have been a primary, right? That we should have actually gotten Biden out sooner. Other people who say, is the United States just not ready for a female president? I really just think that it's because people looked at that campaign and thought, you're not saying anything differently than the most milquetoast Liz Cheney Republican, because that's who you have as your proxies, right? That's who they have. They're trotting people out who are war criminals or the spawn of war criminals. I really do think that turned a lot of people's heads, and they thought, okay, they know about Bernie already, and then DSA, we've had some elected people, and also who went through some fairly public struggles and lost their offices. Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, both of whom were originally DSA candidates, lost their elected offices due to a ton of AIPAC money. AIPAC is the American Israeli Political Action Committee. And people saw that and thought, well, this sucks. Basically, you can't trust the Democrats. We're coming to DSA. And it's been great because we're a little bit more prepared now to take on that huge number of people and get them involved in things, because now we actually have some longstanding campaigns. In my chapter, we have 2 candidates running for city council in Jersey City, one of whom is a Bread and Roses member, Jake Efros, and the other one is a member of Socialist Majority Caucus. They're running on a slate, in city council. And while city council might sound like, in Jersey City might sound kind of small potatoes, I think that we've really realized that we need to build a stable bench of people who can put our politics out honestly in the world, and be able to build a constituency around those politics. And that's becoming kind of more of the center of DSA. And I really think that a lot of people are very attracted to that. They're attracted to an organization that is, we're not a party yet, but we are working to try to become an alternative that's a true alternative to Democrats. And we're willing to say that, we're actually willing to come out and say that now. And I am on steering for growth and development as well as for national political education. And I've just been very encouraged to see all of the people who are not only chapters that are trying to kind of get their feet back under them. Chapters are like the next smallest, like we have chapters and then we have a national DSA, kind of like that's the unit. And a lot of chapters are looking to improve their organizing so that they can both like attract people as well as keep them and keep them involved and like really develop people's politics. And like we're making more and better socialists now rather than just kind of depending on the Bernie bump or the Trump bump or whatever, which, from my view, it's like as a person who was a Bernie bumper, I guess, I also have thought, wouldn't it be great if like what we're doing is attracting people on the basis of our program instead of like a single person who calls himself a democratic socialist? We're always going to need both, right? We're always going to need like the people who are publicizing it, who are actually out there on the stage. But I think we're getting to the point where now people are willing to show up to something and be like, all right, I want to talk to like a normal person who can tell me about like, these things. And it's not maybe so dependent on the celebrities.
To maybe restate it at a broad level, the task is essentially at a broad level remain the same as they do for socialists anywhere in the world. That's to build social movements, to build the party or connect protests to politics. And I think, it's time to advance that kind of discussion because we've been saying these things for years in various left spaces and various kinds of movements, but it's time to make rubber hit the road and get really concrete about what that means in our context. So recent conventions, conferences within the realms of DSA or other kinds of organizations, I think are starting to give, promising hints as to what that looks like. There's a lot of enthusiasm given the vacuum left open by the Democrats to experiment with more independent political action, whether that means like running people as independents or, using other kinds of tactics, building community struggles around which, independent political party infrastructure can form, uniting various labor struggles, moving beyond, the struggle for basic bread and butter issues, better wages, but identifying like, are there, pieces of legislation that unions can not only sign on to, but actually engage in, industrial action over, are there candidates, for example, that unions want to run and unite around? And so to build concrete initiatives like that will be our task in the coming period so that this, magic buzzword of independent political action and things of that nature aren't just like nice sounding things, but things that, have meaning out in the world. So I think that's our task right now, and I'm excited to get to work.
Thank you everyone for joining us on the Green Left Show. And a special thanks to Sin and Michaela for their insights and time today. We have a whole range of articles covering all of these developments and Trump's actions in Green Left, as well as other global and Australian news and politics, as well as book, music and film reviews and heaps more. Head to greenleft.org.au to find all of that. If you'd like to support our work, head to greenleft.org.au/support. Plans start from just $5 a month, and we don't take any corporate sponsorships or advertising, so your support makes a massive difference in helping us continue with this work. Also, please leave a like and a comment and share with your friends, family, colleagues to help get this video out to more people. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Green Left Show.